Anatomy of a Meltdown. This was written in 2008, December 1st. So this was when the economy was basically falling apart, right? And the financial crisis actually started a year before, right? The real estate bubble was popping a year before. But for those of us casuals who weren't investing in the real estate market or the credit default swaps and all that, it hit us in 2008 when I was in college. So again, if you don't understand what credit default swaps and all that stuff is, it's okay. I don't think the people who invented credit default swaps even understand what it is. But we'll explore more of that as we read this. So who is this guy, you guys ask? Ben Bernanke. He was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is, you could call them a semi-autonomous. They're supposed to be fully autonomous, right? But one of the things I learned from reading this is that they're not really autonomous, but we're going to get to that. But they're a semi-autonomous organization in America that regulates, controls the money supply and interest rates. So I think that's a good way to describe what the Federal Reserve is. So the Federal Reserve, a very important part of America's sort of half capitalist economy, right? I don't think there's any society that really is fully capitalist anymore. So this is Ben Bernanke. He was the guy. He was the chairman. Now, the Federal Reserve in America is split into different regions, right? There's something called the New York Fed. The New York Fed is usually very powerful. There's the St. Louis Fed. Maybe we'll do an entire episode devoted to the U.S. Federal Reserve. Anyways, so let's get started. I have notes from when I first read this in college, and then I have notes from when I read this a few months ago. So let's start with the first paragraph just to see if it captures our interest, right? Usually the first paragraph is supposed to bring us in. Some are born radical, some are made radical, and some have radicalism thrust upon them. This is the way with Ben Bernanke as he struggles to rescue the American financial system from collapse. Again, for those who are tuning in, this was written December 1st, 2008. So this was as the financial crisis was unraveling in America, which filtered to the world. Early every morning, weekends included, Bernanke arrives at his headquarters of the Federal Reserve, an austere white marble pile on Constitution Avenue in Foggy Bottom. This is in D.C., by the way, for those of you who don't know where Foggy Bottom is. It's in Washington, D.C. The Fed, which is as hushed inside as a mausoleum, is a place of establishment reserve. Its echoing hallways are lined with somber paintings. The office occupied by Bernanke, a soft-spoken 54-year-old former professor. So Ben Bernanke was 54 at the time. Has high ceilings, several shelves of economics textbooks, and on the desk, a black Bloomberg terminal. On a shelf in a nearby closet sits a scruffy gym bag, which in calmer days, Bernanke took to the Fed gym. The Federal Reserve has its own gym, where he played pickup basketball with his staffers. Wow, okay. That was the first paragraph. Does that bring you into this tale that's going to unfold? I don't know. So it's interesting. Some things to keep in mind, right? This article is going to argue that Ben Bernanke was not a radical. For those of you who knew how the financial crisis turned out, the government ended up spending a lot of money bailing out companies, doing a lot of stuff, right? So especially for people who are more on the right, they were not happy, right? They were like, so the government basically just increased its control over society, basically. And I guess we'll find out Bernanke wasn't. Oh, Powell is currently speaking at the Fed, says viewer Wellington. Huh, interesting. All right. So shout out viewer Wellington. Feel free to talk in the live chat, people. But Bernanke was not supposed to be like a radical statist, as they call it, right? Statist, a guy who like really believes in state control of everything. Anyways, at Princeton, where Bernanke taught economics for many years, he was known for his retiring manner and his statistics-laden research on the Great Depression. For more than a year after he was appointed by President George W. Bush to chair the Fed in February 2006, he faithfully upheld the policies of his immediate predecessor, the charismatic free market conservative Alan Greenspan. And he adhered to the central bank's formal mandates controlling inflation and maintaining employment. So, Alan Greenspan, very long-serving chairman of the Fed before Bernanke. I believe Greenspan was there definitely under Clinton, definitely under Bush, might have even been there under Reagan. I'll have to look it up. For those of you who know how long Greenspan served as the federal chairman, the Federal Reserve chairman, you guys let me know. But Bernanke was, you could say, filling some big shoes, right? Even though some people do criticize Greenspan. And the previous live stream we did where we read this stuff, remember that really complicated article that I read a little bit of? It was kind of comparing Greenspan and Bernanke. But anyways, so there's something called the Greenspan rule I wrote down here. It doesn't matter what it is, basically. You could almost call it like arbitrary economist type of thinking, right? They probably just made up the rule and then just ran with it because who knows better? So Greenspan followed the Greenspan rule. Basically, your reserves, the amount of currency you have in reserves, and then the short-term debt is supposed to be one. Whatever the heck that means, doesn't matter. But Greenspan had a specific rule. The key is just follow what this says. Greenspan was targeting controlling inflation, right? So an economy is supposed to have a little bit of inflation, but you don't want to, and you definitely don't want deflation, right? So that's what the Federal Reserve under Greenspan is trying to do, controlling inflation and making sure employment was up to par. But since the market for subprime mortgages collapsed in the summer of 2007, the growing financial crisis has forced Bernanke to intervene on Wall Street in ways never before contemplated by the Fed. He has slashed interest rates, established new lending programs, extended hundreds of billions of dollars to troubled financial firms, bought debt issued by industrial corporations such as General Electric, and even taken distressed mortgage assets onto the Fed's books. In March, to facilitate the takeover by J.P. Morgan of Bear Stearns, a Wall Street investment bank that was facing bankruptcy, the Fed acquired $29 billion worth of Bear Stearns bad mortgage assets. Wow. How did I didn't catch that the first time. Gotta find a pen. Where's my pens? That's crazy, guys. First of all, I didn't even know that J.P. Morgan bought Bear Stearns. When did this happen? See, every time you read, you get more of this. When did J.P. Morgan, for those of you who don't know, who are not in the U.S., J.P. Morgan's a big financial institution, right? There's a lot of things. J.P. Morgan buys Bear Stearns. I didn't know J.P. Morgan bought Bear Stearns. Wow. The more you learn, man. When did this happen? Let's see. Let me show you guys this real quickly so you guys can read what I'm reading. This is why I'm really glad I kept this article. So here we go. When did J.P. Morgan buy Bear Stearns? Let's see. Yeah, fund up to $30 billion. That's what this says. Of Bear Stearns' less liquid assets. Less liquid just means you can't take it out immediately. So, oh, it even has numbers here. That's pretty funny. We should maybe call. The numbers are here publicly. Maybe we should call them, ask them about this. Well, I had no idea. Okay, all right. I'll be right back, guys. I need a pen. I need to write down some stuff. This is crazy. Anyways, guys, talk in the comments. I'll be right back. All right, guys, I'm back. For those of you who are tuning in right now, this is part one of my exploration of the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. This is something I've wanted to explore for a while. I explored this while it was happening in college, but now, more than 10 years down the line, and our system's still pretty screwed up, right? I think it's time to look at it again. So I just found out that, so in March of, see, this is not written well. March of 2007 or March of 2008? Let's look at this. When did this happen? Was it 2007 or 2008? 2008. Okay. So in March of 2008, J.P. Morgan bought Bear Stearns, or you could call it merge. Yeah, merge. Let's call it merge. I actually funny story. One of the videos I made back in the day about the little funny tournament I did, like a singing tournament. One of the girls in the tournament ended up on Wall Street, and she worked in M&A, mergers and acquisitions, so she would know a lot about this stuff. Like, she told me that, man, M&A is so BS. There's so much BS going on Wall Street in the financial sector when it comes to mergers and acquisitions. So if you want to be cynical, work on Wall Street. If you really want to be cynical, work in the M&A part of Wall Street. Anyways, my pen's not working, so I might have to get a different pen. But until then, let me read some of your comments. I have a feeling this is going to generate a lot of talk. Viewer L. Wellington says, Bernanke is your typical establishment economist under the tutelage of Stan Fisher. He was in the same class as Krugman, Summers. Yeah, exactly. So, by no means Bernanke is a radical. Yeah. J.P. Morgan bought Bear Stearns March of 2008. Exactly. Pennies on the dollar. Dude, L. Wellington, man, thank you for tuning in. I'm glad YouTube, the algorithm, served this to someone who really has delved into this. So we're in good hands, man. Let me find another pen since this pen decided not to work. Thank you guys for waiting, guys. Hopefully this is the last time. I'm going to have to go get something. But that is crazy. March of 2008, about 29 to 30 billion, J.P. Morgan acquires Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns. And guys, this is before all the big bailouts, right? So this is crazy. It's almost like it's like a wave, right? No matter what's going to happen, the wave's going to fall. You just know. So anyone that was studying the markets at the time probably knew what was going to happen. Because once you get the Fed involved, and then eventually once you get the entire government involved, it's hard to pull back, right? That's the issue with all this. Anyways, Ben Bernanke, who seemed to have been selected as much for his predictability as for his economic expertise, is now engaged in the biggest use of the Fed's authority since its inception in 1913. So, when the Fed was started, especially before the Great Depression, the New York Fed, so the Fed's broken up into different regions, right? The New York Fed was really powerful in the early days of the Fed. And I believe both Milton Friedman, I'm going to read this for you guys one day too. Both Milton Friedman and Bernanke have argued about why the Depression was a little bit longer, right? Why it was even a depression, basically. And at least Milton Friedman was really emphasized the fact that the Fed had very tight monetary policy. What that means is interest rates lending was really hard after the economy crashed in 29. Again, we'll explore that in the future. But so Bernanke and Milton Friedman, and I think Greenspan too, they studied the Great Depression, but from a monetarist view. Monetarism is basically how you use central banks, aka in the case of the U.S., the Federal Reserve, to help or hurt or make the economy. Anyways, Bernanke working closely with Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, a voluble former investment banker. Guys. Who is causing the financial crisis at this point? A lot of the financial sector, especially investment banking, right? Who is now the Treasury Secretary? A former investment banker. We'll get to that soon. You guys see what's going on? There's a concept in politics called the revolving door. Basically, you get to a powerful position in the private sector, you're going to have to rub shoulders with people who are regulating you in the public sector, aka the government. And then because you guys know each other, you guys know how everything works, eventually it's almost like you become the most expert person at the other person's role too. So a lot of times what happens is people at little top positions in the private sector end up working in the public sector, and then people in the public sector go into the private sector into those positions that they're regulating. So it's like revolving. The people that are being regulated end up in the positions in the government to regulate, and then the people who are regulating sometimes don't want to be in the government anymore. They end up in the positions that they were previously regulating. It's a really interesting thing. You see that here. Hank Paulson, Henry Paulson, the Treasury Secretary. Treasury, for those who don't know, Treasury's managing money, right? Managing anything that is. Let me before I say more, let me just give you guys a better definition than trying to just sort of explain this to a 2-year-old. Treasury Department. Let me just kind of see what its sort of official mission is. Let's see. Policy issues. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this was perfect. Let me show you guys this. So, how do I share my screen? Here. I'm sharing my screen now. See, like for example, look at the Treasury, right? Tax policy, economic policy, inflation reduction. Yeah, just things related to money, right? Things related to money, budgets, right? So the U.S. Department of the Treasury, see, lots of stuff. I mean, I didn't know about this stuff, but yeah. I didn't know about this stuff too. So it looks like a lot of other departments are under the Treasury. That makes sense. So even the IRS is under the Treasury. The Mint, right? This is what prints money. The Mint is under the Treasury. So Treasury is a very powerful domestic department in America. So the dude who was running the Treasury at the time used to be an investment banker. Right. I'm not implying anything. It happens a lot in America. So as recently as Labor Day, he believed that the strategy was working. The credit markets remained open. The economy was still expanding. If slowly oil prices were dropping, and there were tentative signs that house prices were stabilizing. Again, a lot of this crash happened with real estate, right? A lot can still go wrong, but at least I can see a path that will bring us out of this entire episode relatively intact. He told a visitor to his office in August. So when was Labor Day in 2008? Let's look. For those of you outside of America, Labor Day traditionally is when after Labor Day school started, but then things started changing, and then most states now in America, school starts before Labor Day. But Labor Day is in September. It's the first Monday in September. There we go. So when was Labor Day in 2008? Let's see. Labor Day was when was it? It's not helpful. This is not helpful. Oh, it was on the 1st. Oh, okay. So Labor Day in 2008 was actually the first day of September. So it's good to piece together a time frame, right? So Labor Day was September 1st, 2008. By mid-September, so about 14 days later, however, the outlook was much grimmer. On Monday, September 15th, Lehman Brothers, another Wall Street investment bank that had made bad bets on subprime mortgage securities, filed for bankruptcy. Protection after Bernanke, Paulson, and the bank's senior executives failed to find a way to save it or to sell it to a healthier firm. During the next 48 hours, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell nearly 400 points. I remember my parents even telling me about this. Bank of America announced its purchase of Merrill Lynch. Hey, when did that happen? Bank of America. Let's look this up. I can't believe I didn't catch all this. I guess here's why. When I took economics in college, macroeconomics, my professor was actually a former Lehman Brothers investment banker. So obviously she was probably a little biased, right? And she actually gave us these readings. So she was the one that pumped a lot of Milton Friedman on our throats. So obviously she really believed in capitalism, but I think anyone that wants to be objective about what capitalism was like before the financial crisis, it wasn't really capitalism. You could call it crony capitalism, or you could call it, help me out here, any viewers that want to give me a better word. I called it half capitalism in the beginning of the video, but it wasn't real capitalism, man. Anytime the person that is in charge of the Treasury used to be working for the financial sector, there's like a conflict of interest here. So that's not real capitalism. But anyways, before we get there, let me look up how much Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch. Bank of America purchase Merrill Lynch. It's so funny how all these things just kind of what's the word? They fly under our radars, right? Because eventually the super big financial rescues that the U.S. government did, the amount of money was a lot, right? So anyways, okay, 50 billion. So Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch for 50 billion. And then later on, they settled a class action lawsuit for an additional 2.43 billion. So, when did this happen? Let's see, Bank of America. There it is. Here it is. Here's something by the Harvard Business School. There we go. Guys, feel free to leave your comments, leave your questions. Again, as you can tell, I do occasionally have a lot of fun thinking about this. It's not too, you don't want to think too much about this, right? It'll hurt your brain, but to understand where the world is, why everything's so screwed up. It's Bill Clinton, I think, is overrated, but he did say something important, which is it's the economy, stupid, right? It is true. If everyone could live a good life, why would we have people fighting and stuff like that, right? Why would we care about what other people are doing, right? So it all stems from the fact that things started getting bad in 2007, and then this article again is written in 2008. So it was December 22nd, which is weird because okay, Bank of America announced its purchase. So the purchase didn't finalize until after this article was written. AIG, the country's biggest insurance company, began talks with the New York Fed. There we go. The New York Fed about a possible rescue. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, the two wealthiest investment banks on Wall Street, were also in trouble. Their stock prices tumbled as rumors circulated that they were having difficulty borrowing money. Both Goldman and Morgan were having a run on the bank. A run on the bank means people take out their stuff from the institution. This is a controversial thing, but this is a very important thing to understand about how banking works. So let me write this down. So let's say I run a bank, right? So this is the Bank of Jerry. This is the Bank of Jerry. So this is viewer one. I guess since we have a viewer that's, we'll whoever comments, so we'll call Wellington, right? So this is viewer Wellington. And then some other viewer, shout out Youssef. So we'll include Youssef as viewer 2. This is a very, if you want to understand the banking sector, you really have to understand this. This is like 101. This will help your understanding of everything. So, let's say viewer Wellington, shout out viewer Wellington who's commenting in the live chat. Let's say viewer Wellington has $200, okay? He wants to put this money somewhere safe, but how do I give him incentive? Well, I'll tell him, look, if you put this in my bank for a year and you don't take it out beforehand, at the end of it, I'll give you more money. That's called interest, right? Let's say I give him 10% interest. So I offer 10% interest. Well, that's pretty good. So let's say he puts his $200 in my bank for a year. At the end of the year, if he takes it out, he gets $220 back, right? That's 10%. Now, he could keep it in for more, right? Now, he puts his $200 into my bank. Now, viewer Youssef needs some money. Let's say viewer Youssef, he needs $100. Because I know in most case scenarios, viewer Wellington is not going to take money out of the bank within this year, I can lend $100 to viewer Youssef, right? Now, obviously, I'm going to tell viewer Youssef, I'm doing you a favor, right? I'm not just a free type of philanthropist. So when I lend you, you're going to have to pay a little more, right? So I'm going to have to charge him something. So let's say viewer Youssef needs $100. Well, when he returns the money to me, I'm going to charge him interest again. I'm going to say 10% interest, right? So when viewer Youssef gives me back the money, he's going to have to give me back 110, right? 10% if I'm sticking to 10%. That's the first part, right? But the crazy part about this is I sort of have created money out of nothing. What does that mean? Think about this. Viewer Wellington put $200 that he still owns into my bank, but I lent out $100 of Wellington's money to viewer Youssef. So even though there's still only $200 floating around, right? But because now Youssef has $100 to use, and Wellington has $200 that he's not going to use, technically, there's $300 now flowing around. You see? You're creating money. That banks create money, but it's not really creating money, but it is creating money. So much of the financial sector, so much of banking is about trust, right? So think about this on the big scale, right? Let's say more people, more viewers put their money into my bank for different amounts of period. I know they're likely not going to take the money out before the agreed upon time, or else they're not going to get the interest. They're not going to get the extra money, right? So I can lend that money out to other people, and then I can charge those people interest when they give me back the money. So I'm gaining, right, as the middleman, but I'm also giving the people who borrow money, right? You see how it works? Again, I hope I'm explaining this correctly, but you're kind of creating money out of thin air. Now, this goes back to what a run on the bank means, right? Obviously, let's say if someone's like, oh, Jerry's kind of sketch, man, I don't trust him. What if a lot of people realize? What are they going to do? They're going to be like, Jerry, I'll even pay a penalty. I'll take my money out right now. But where is that money? I've lent that money out to other people, right? If in the beginning of, let's say, of the summer, so not a year, but in the summer, Wellington's like, I don't like Jerry. Give me back my $200. You can even charge me money because I violated my contract. Charge me $50. I need my $150. Actually, my example, that's fine because I only gave Yusef $100, right? But let's say another viewer comes along. Let's see if there's anyone else in the live chat. Oh, Caramel's here. Caramel's here. So viewer Caramel, let's say, needs $70, right? So again, I lend to viewer Caramel from the $200 that viewer Wellington gave me. I lend him $70 and I say, look, 10% interest. So when you pay it back in a year, you pay $77, right? Or I can even be a little bit more aggressive. I'd be like, whatever money you make, it's 20% or something like that. But now look what happens. If viewer Wellington wants his $200 back because he doesn't trust me anymore and he wants to take it out early, I don't have enough money to give him back $200, right? $100 is lent to viewer Yusef. $70 is lent to viewer Carmel. I only have $30 to give back to him, right? This is how run on a bank happens. If too many people don't have trust anymore and they want their stuff out, the bank doesn't have the money because the money is lent out to create more money, right? This is the essential problem with banking. This is why, again, correct me if I'm wrong, fellow Christians, but in Christianity, there's a rule that says you can't lend with interest. The whole point is that you create a lot of gross incentives and you create a lot of fake currency. You're not actually creating wealth. It looks like you're creating wealth, and on paper, it looks like you're creating wealth, but you're not creating wealth. Anyways, I hope, again, it's much more complicated, right? Because we have different types of monies. That's the wrong word. We have different ways of charging interest. We have different short-term, long-term ways of borrowing, lending. It's very complicated. But at the very fundamental is this I just showed you, right? It's this. It's that as a bank, you are an institution that takes money, promises more returns, and then lends it out with a fee, but you don't have that much actually in your vaults, right? And depending on the country, depending on the regulations, it's some percent, right? Some percent of liquidity, basically, how much you can actually give if you were forced to give, right? Or give back, that is. So this is called fractional reserve banking. A reserve is how much you hold there. You don't lend out, right? How much currency you don't lend out. So this is called fractional reserve banking. It's always kind of a little sketch, and you realize that so much of all this is built on trust, man. So much of this is built on trust. I hope you guys are enjoying how I'm explaining this. This is so central to everything that's going on. Imagine this, but on a much bigger scale in the U.S. economy. This is what's going on. So, fractional reserve banking. I think I did a good job explaining that. You guys let me know. Did I do a good job explaining this? Let me read some comments right now. Let's see. Yeah, L. Wellington said banks create money endogenously. I guess that's the techno word or the financial word. Yeah, currency is created for government to poof its magic. yeah, so true. Okay, anyways, let's keep going. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this, man. So, the Fed talked with Wall Street executives about creating a lifeline for Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, which would have given the firms greater access to central bank funds, but Bernanke decided that even more drastic action was needed. On Wednesday, September 17th, a day after the Fed agreed to inject $85 billion of taxpayer money into AIG, Bernanke asked Paulson to accompany him to Capitol Hill and make the case for a congressional bailout of the entire banking industry. We can't keep doing this, Bernanke told Paulson, both because we at the Fed don't have the necessary resources and for reasons of democratic legitimacy. It's important that the Congress come in and take control of the situation. Democratic legitimacy. Remember how Bush stole the election from Gore? Yeah. Very legitimate right there. So, So 85 billion. 85 billion, bro. 85 billion was given to AIG September 17th, 2008. Okay, check this out. This is for those of you who've been watching since the beginning. Paulson agreed. A bailout ran counter to the Bush administration's free market principles and to his own belief that reckless behavior should not be rewarded. But the Treasury Secretary, Paulson, okay? But he had worked on Wall Street for 32 years, most recently as the CEO of Goldman Sachs. You know who ended up getting a lot of benefits from all this? Goldman Sachs. Not implying anything. It could just be a coincidence, guys. But the Treasury Secretary, before becoming the Treasury Secretary, was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs did pretty well after all the bailouts, not implying anything, and had never seen a financial crisis of this magnitude. He had come to respect Bernanke's judgment, and he shared his conviction that in an emergency, pragmatism trumps ideology. YouTube, Trump, not Donald Trump, but Trump as in the verb, okay? Please understand, I'm trying to explore economics here. The next day, the men decided they would go see President Bush. He had come to respect Bernanke's judgment. Yeah, as long as Bernanke helps Goldman Sachs. Right? Oh, man. I mean, when I reread this a few months ago, I was like, how did I miss that when I was in college? Because in college, I wasn't as cynical, right? I was like, there's no revolving door. Come on, man. Now you know. Come on. How is politics inevitably leads to some corruption? It's like, what degree can you accept, right? If it's like once in a while, big companies treat you as a politician to dinner so they can get to speak to you more, maybe that's okay, right? That's just an access thing. But that's where I would set the boundary. It's inevitable, right? People will want to get your attention, so they're going to try to treat you to dinner or whatever. But beyond that, I think, unfortunately, that's when you have to set the line, right? Like, if they treat you to dinner and suddenly the policies you help pass help them, right? So I think as a politician, you just have to say, look, if you want access to me, sure, like, make an effort, but that doesn't guarantee anything. But that's a slippery slope, because if they treat you to lavish meals and you're buddies with them, how are you not going to help them, right? That's just how human nature is. So yeah, you see how just when you have power, unfortunately, it's really hard. It's really hard, especially if you want to campaign. You need money. Yeah, anyways, I think it's a little good stopping point. Not stopping point. I'm just going to pause. I'm going to read your comments. So far, nobody talking in the live chat. Maybe that means I'm engrossing you guys. Maybe that means you guys really like what I'm reading. So that's really exciting. Let me also turn on the live chats. Maybe I'll insert an ad right now. Should I just insert an ad? Let me drink some water. For those of you tuning in, we're exploring the financial crisis. I thought I'd get through this whole article, but we literally have only read 2 pages because it's so dense, but this is why it's so interesting. It's so interesting. To summarize what we've seen, a lot of bailouts already, right? And this is not even when the real stuff, I'm going to say this word once, the real shit hits the fan. You can curse occasionally on YouTube now. Just don't curse in the beginning, right? And be what's the word? Lost my train of thought. Basically, you can curse once in a while on YouTube. YouTube's changed, right? Since when I first had this channel. So, I think we can skip a little bit. Let me go to here. Let's see. I'll skip a little bit. I have the link to this article. You guys can watch more. You guys can read this. I just want to, because if we're gonna read this entire thing, this is 15 pages. We're gonna spend 6 hours, which could be fun, but I gotta eat eventually. If you guys like what you're watching, feel free to press a like, or you can even donate or join as a channel member if you like what you're watching. Let's see. Oh, here. Yeah, this is an important part that we should explore. So and in fact, it was just the anniversary of this. You guys know what I'm talking about. When Bernanke joined the Fed, it was struggling to revive the economy after the NASDAQ collapse of 2000 to 2001 and the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Between September 2001 and June 2003, Greenspan and his colleagues cut the federal funds rate, the key interest rate under the Fed's control, from 3.5% to 1%, its lowest level since the 1950s. Cutting interest rates during an economic downturn is standard policy at the Fed. Lower borrowing costs encourage households and businesses to spend more. But Greenspan's rate reductions were unusual in their scale and their longevity. The Fed didn't reverse course until the summer of 2004. And even then it moved slowly, raising the federal funds rate in quarter-point increments. So a lot of people argue that Greenspan basically helped really contribute to this real estate issue, right? So what is the federal funds rate? It's a macroeconomics concept. The federal funds rate basically is the interest rate that banks at the end of the day, if they need to borrow money from each other, it's the interest rate of that. That's what the federal funds rate is. So it's a complicated process how the federal funds rates, the changes in it cut the interest rate to the consumers or to businesses, right? That I'm not going to get into because the truth is I don't even remember the process. But just so you know, federal funds rate is not the same as interest rate, even though a lot of people use it interchangeably. Now, for those of you who remember, we do have some not Gen Z and Gen Alpha people now. But if you remember before 2000, what was the collapse? It was the dot-com bubble, right? The first dot-com bubble. So the dot-com bubble messed the economy up for a while, and then America had 9/11. That messed up the global economy. So Greenspan basically had to do a lot of things, including encourage probably a little bit too much borrowing from the entire economy, right? I did this once before, but I guess we're going to do this again. By the way, shout out people who kind of saw my first little chart. Let's draw another chart. So this is from the Austrian School of Economics. Again, the Austrian School of Economics is not very math heavy, but it's logically very sound, right? And I'm not saying that's always correct because sometimes the human logic is limited, but this is a very logically sound graph that the Austrian School of Economics uses. So consumption and investment, right? If I spend all my money investing, okay, I save all my money, I'm going to have $0 to spend on anything, right? But if I spend all my money, then I have no money to save, to invest, right? You can think of saving and investment as the same thing. It's not exactly the same thing, but in this case, we're just going to say it's the same thing. So most people's habits lie somewhere here, somewhere on this graph, right? Somewhere on the tip of this. Some people invest much more. Some people spend much more. But we're all here. Now, the government can, of course, mess with signals in the market and make people think it's a better time to invest than maybe it is. So that's how you can artificially create maybe more investment than what's actually at equilibrium. Equilibrium means if everything is standard, no human intervention, what people naturally would do. No human state intervention, I guess is the best way to describe it. So I'm just drawing something. I can't draw while I'm holding it up, so I'll explain this to you guys. So if the government, let's say, does some things to encourage certain behaviors, right, it can artificially stimulate the economy, making it look like people's ability to spend and save are actually out here. But what you're actually doing is you're making some people who should have spent a little less spend more, and you're making some people who should have saved and invested less save or invest more. So, because again, you can't create things from thin air. There's always trade-offs, right? So why am I explaining all this? It's just when you mess in a perfect world, the pricing mechanism is the most important thing to tell you where things are at. But if you mess with the pricing mechanism, aka you manipulate interest rates, you pump money into the economy, you do things that mess with where the equilibrium point is, then you mess with people's behavior. Now, obviously, some of you might say, how do we know there's one equilibrium point, or how do we know the equilibrium point's always correct, right? And that's a valid contention you're given. I don't know enough. I haven't studied this enough to know all the theory and all the kind of experiments and whatever. But the point is, the economy is like a big blob that we all, people who study it, people who live in it, people who try to control it, people who try to decontrol it, we all have a little bit. It's like touching an elephant as a blind person. We all kind of know a little bit about it, but none of us really know the elephant. And there's an AI revolution happening, and I'm sure we'll get more insights into economics, history, sociology, all this stuff. But as of now, even people like Bernanke, Princeton educated, they really don't know shit. Just the truth. They might know a little bit more on a specific subject in economics than you and I, but very few people. I could argue nobody knows the big picture. It's too complicated. It's too complicated. Wow, I've never ranted about this before. I think this is a pretty reasonable objective rant. I'm not taking sides. All I'm saying is our brains are powerful, but even if you put, how many people are there in the world? 8 billion, 9 billion people's brains? We're nothing, man. We're nothing. We don't know anything. With the cheap financing readily available, a housing boom developed. Families bought homes they couldn't have afforded at higher interest rates. Again, going back to this graph, right? Speculators bought properties to flip. I remember that. I had when we lived in low-income apartments when I was first here. If you guys haven't seen that video, I made a little video on that back in the day. You look it up in the video history. It's the one on Bubbles. I had an Indian neighbor across the street, and he had moved out at the time, but sometimes he'd come back and visit my parents, right? Because I guess he considered my dad a friend, and he was like, I guess he was really into speculating on real estate. A lot of people were, so it's not an attack on anyone, right? Again, it's the incentives from the distortion of interest rates. So he comes to my dad's place, and I think at this point he's bought 2 properties. He's like, when you buy a house, you have to purchase 2 properties. So if one property goes bad, you can always sell it and you still have the other property. That's what he told my dad. And, we weren't at the point to even buy one property. So, but it's interesting how people thought back then, right? So, again, if you guys have been following along, you could argue some of this was Greenspan, right? Greenspan, by artificially lowering a lot of things, including the federal funds rate, it created a perverse incentive where people who shouldn't have been borrowing money for different things, including buying houses, were buying houses that they couldn't afford. So, people with modest incomes or poor credit took out mortgages designed for marginal buyers, such as subprime loans, interest-only loans, and Alt-A loans. On Wall Street, a huge market evolved in subprime mortgage bonds, securities backed by payment streams from dozens or hundreds of individual subprime mortgages. Banks and other mortgage lenders relaxed their credit standards, knowing that many of the loans they issued would be bundled into mortgage securities and sold to investors. Yeah, if you guys can imagine, it's like a foundation built on a lot of weak material, right? You don't have to understand all the words that we just read, but obviously it's a lot of shaky things that were building up this economy. The Fed's easy money policy put a lot of the wind at the back of some of the transactions in the housing market and elsewhere that we are now suffering from, Glenn Hubbard told me before leaving government in 2003. Hubbard argued that in White House meetings, the Fed needed to start raising rates. It was particularly striking for the Fed to maintain an accommodative policy after the 2003 tax cut, which gave another boost to the economy. Hubbard said that was a significant error. Glenn Hubbard was the dean of the Columbia Business School, and then he became the chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors. So he was in the Bush administration. So Glenn Hubbard, I guess, saw that there were issues in some of these policies. And a lot of you can kind of see where this is going, right? So maybe I don't need to kind of read a lot of this, but the warning signs were there, right? We already see there's a lot of shaky foundations. I'm going to pause right there. I'm going to see if anyone's talking in the live chat. Again, don't feel obligated to talk in the live chat, but obviously it's pretty dense readings. I know some of you have thoughts, right? It was all Romanians, says Musaka. You got to explain that. L. Wellington agrees with me. Wellington, are you an economist, by the way? You seem to know a lot about this. Did you just study economics on the side, or did you study it like officially? I would love to know what you did, because you seem to be very knowledgeable. Same with Caramel Dreams, and Caramel Dreams seems to know a lot. So those of you who know a lot about this, let me know what your kind of background is on this. So I'm going to keep going. Let me just make sure the live stream is healthy. So, all right, here we go. We're going to jump a little bit ahead to some of the things that kind of pissed me off a little bit. Let's see if we can find it. Okay, here we go. A little summary of what we're talking about. Between 2004 and 2007, White, aka William White, who's the former economist at the Bank of International Settlements, William White and his colleagues continued to warn about a global credit boom, but they were largely ignored in the United States. In the field of economics, American academics have such a large reputation that they sweep all before them, White said. If you add to that the personal reputation of Maestro, aka Alan Greenspan, it was very difficult for anyone else to come in and say there are problems building. So, let's see. I gotta find that part that really pissed me off when I first read this. Oh, here it is. So, Bernanke, of course, replaced Greenspan right after Alan Greenspan got old. Now, if you guys watched from the beginning, you guys know that the Federal Reserve is supposed to be sort of semi-independent, if not completely independent. The whole point is a politician's not supposed to be able to use our money supply to manipulate the economy for votes, right? The economy should function no matter who's in power, right? That's like one of the tenets of America. But this was really interesting. Check this out. From the moment Bernanke went to work for Bush, again, think about how it's phrased. I didn't know Bernanke was working for Bush. I thought Bernanke was working for the economy. Anyways, you'll figure out why it was phrased like this. He was seen as a likely successor to Greenspan, who was due to retire in January 2006. Shortly after Labor Day, at Bush's request, Al Hubbard and Lisa Wright, the White House personnel director, compiled a list of 8 or 10 candidates for the Fed chairmanship and interviewed several of them. The selection committee eventually settled on Bernanke. An important part of the Fed job is bringing people along with you on the FOMC. FOMC is something related to, it's defined somewhere here. FOMC is something related to, I believe, the housing market or something. Doesn't matter. Federal Open Market Committee. Yeah, exactly. Federal Open Market Committee. It's part of the Fed, basically. Where was that? The White House personnel director, Hubbard, told me he had the right responsibility to do that. Plus, Ben is a very powerful thinker. We're impressed with his theories of the world and the way he thinks. He believes in free markets. Although Bernanke's basically worked in academia all these years, right? Just because someone's smart and thinks well does not mean they've experienced anything. It's like it's a danger in trusting intellectuals, right? I'm not saying intellectuals aren't changing society positively in many ways, but you can't put blind trust on intellectuals. And Bernanke's definitely an intellectual first, a person of the world second, right? Some press reports have suggested that the public controversy over the abortive nomination of Supreme Court to the Supreme Court of Harriet Miers, the White House counsel, helped Bernanke's chances because it put pressure on the administration to appoint a nonpartisan figure. When there was room in the Supreme Court, America has 9 Supreme Court justices. Bush tried to appoint Harriet Miers, and it caused a big stir. Nobody was happy because Harriet Miers was very unqualified. So, on October 24th, 2005, President Bush nominated Bernanke as the 14th chairman of the Fed, saying he commands deep respect in the global financial community. After thanking the president, Bernanke said that if the Senate confirmed him, his first priority would be to maintain continuity with the policies and policy strategies established during the Greenspan years. So for those of you who aren't familiar with American politics, a lot of government officials, the president nominates, and the Senate's the upper house, the upper Congress, and every state in America has 50 states, 2 senators, right? So the Senate kind of gives every state, no matter the population, equal representation. So the Senate confirms or denies presidential appointments. And what I learned from this is that the chairman of the Fed is nominated by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. And that gives me a little bit of like a bad feeling because obviously the president's not going to nominate someone that's not on his side, right? Obviously. So the president's either going to nominate someone that agrees with him on a lot of things, or if the president's trying to be neutral, going to nominate someone that is middle ground enough that all the people in the Senate, so theoretically representing all 50 states, aka theoretically kind of representing a lot of American population, plus the president's team, they like the guy. They like the guy's whatever, his theories, his biases, etc. But obviously, as you know, depending on where the wind blows in American politics, the Senate can be dominated by one side, right? So you could theoretically, and I'm not saying Bernanke is like this, but you could theoretically have someone who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, controlling our money supply, our interest rates, etc., who is not too independent. Especially, let's say, I don't remember if at this time Bush had the Senate too. But if Bush had the Senate, probably whoever he nominates to different positions are going to go through easier, especially if they're right-leaning, right? Bush was a Republican. So theoretically, if you had the Senate and it's time for you to nominate different people to different positions, you could choose someone that did not fall on the spectrum in a way that represented all of America. Yeah, I'm overthinking this a little, but you get my point. If the Federal Reserve's supposed to be independent, why is there this kind of nomination process like for all the other people that the government, that the president tries to put in positions of power to do things in our government, right? Then as I'm talking about this, I'm like, how would you find a chairman of the Fed then, right? Because like if they elect them within themselves, they could be captured, right, by other interests. So how do you keep the Fed independent? Maybe there's no way. So the whole concept of the Federal Reserve maybe was just, what's the right word I'm looking for? Maybe the whole concept of the Federal Reserve was just failed at day one, right? How are you supposed to be independent if to become the person that can do something at the Fed, you have to be on the president's favor and then you have to be on the Senate's favor? I don't know. Again, these politicians, we elect the president, we elect our senators theoretically to represent us, right? But then on the other hand, you also know that if the Fed's truly independent, sometimes it has to act against the majority will. It has to act against what the population's doing, because just because everyone's doing something doesn't mean it's correct, right? That's the whole point of what's going on here in the financial crisis. But yeah, so how independent is the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the central bank? And it's not just a question for Americans. Whoever's watching and wherever, how independent is your central bank, if you even have a central bank? Do we need a central bank? That's a can of worms. So yeah, I'm getting a little tired, so I'm going to wrap this up. Basically, eventually, you guys know, they let Lehman Brothers fail, but they saved AIG. If you guys want, maybe I'll do a part 2 of this. If you guys want that, I'm getting really tired. I need to eat. So, they let AIG fail. Sorry, they let Lehman Brothers fail, but they bailed AIG out for $85 billion. Okay, so the Federal Reserve bailing out AIG, $85 billion, took 80% of the company's equity. So basically, AIG was owned by the government, and the $85 billion was paid for by us taxpayers. But because the Federal Reserve now owned 80% of the company's equity, theoretically, as AIG bounced back, us taxpayers would be paid back, right? And so this is something that now, in hindsight, you could look at whether this worked or not. And to the Fed's credit, in 2012, the money, the $85 billion that was given to AIG was paid back. So that was actually an okay thing it did. Let's see. Oh, so $85 billion was just the beginning. Eventually, $150 billion was given to AIG. But my point is, all that money was given back to the public, to the taxpayers, by 2012. So that fear, I think, that some of us had you can assuage that fear. Is there anything else we need to do? I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot. It's very dense, right? But I think the most important things we sort of covered in this. I hope you guys enjoyed this, man. If you guys want a longer exploration into this, maybe I can do more, but I have an even thicker one for us to read. So I don't want to get bogged down in this one, although this one is very interesting because this one was written in 2009, so this was a year after, and this was when the bailouts were happening under Obama. So this one's very dense. Very dense, man. This one, many more pages than this, because obviously more information was known by this. So in case you guys wanted to know, that's Hank Paulson. That's the Treasury Secretary who was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. That's Bernanke. Let's see. This is Timothy Geithner. Geithner was the president of the New York Fed. So, you guys let me know, man, how much more of this. I mean, I'm definitely going to explore this longer article, but this article that I'm exploring right now, the shorter one, written in 2008, if you guys want more exploration, maybe we'll do a part 2. So originally I was going to do 2 parts, but maybe we can do 5 parts. 2 parts for this article, and then 3 parts for this. What do you guys think? Okay, let me finish off by reading your live chats, any last live chats. Again, for those of you tuning in, thank you. We had a lot of good time exploring this. I hope this was very, very enlightening. I definitely, my 3rd time reading this, I got even more out of this, like things I didn't even think about. So, yeah, so Musaka says Romania's public and private sector debts increased in the years leading up to the crisis. Yeah, but everyone did, right? Every country did. Caramel Dreams lived under hyperinflation multiple times, under military dictatorship, birth of democracies, dictatorships, socialism, communism, democracy, studied economics at the university, studied the history of money for over 20 years. Wow, it's Caramel Dreams, man. Reach out to me via email. We should do a talk together. I'm sure you have a lot of great things that you could share with us viewers. If you want, I would love to interview you. Viewer Wellington studied economics at UT Austin. UT Austin's a good school. Do my best with keeping up with modern economics, which deviates a lot from what we learned in classrooms. Yep. Yep. So Wellington also says that central banks' best interests today are to serve the people, not the political parties. But of course, that's a load of bollocks, exactly. So, Caramel James, reach out to me, please, via email. Would love to interview you. We could do a little podcast. And Wellington, please, I think you and I would have a great podcast talking about economics. So the offer's there, man. Please, both of you, reach out to me. Anyone else that wants to talk about this stuff, reach out to me too. So thank you guys so much, man. This was so fun. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did. And I promised a person at the coffee shop I'd give them this to read. But if you guys want a part 2 on this, maybe I will hold off giving this to him. Anyways, guys, I think it's time. Thank you guys so much, man. And we're going to do a lot more. My energy levels are low now, so I will end this live stream. This was so fun. And we will talk again soon. You got to understand the world, right? That's the whole point of this. And we're going to keep understanding this world, man. There's little pieces we can put together. We're all blind people looking at elephants, touching an elephant. But what's to say we can't figure out more of what the elephant's made of, right?